So to keep her company, Rubezahl turns the turnips into her friends and acquaintances. Oh, that's kind of nice, actually. As the turnips wilt after a little while, as turnips are wont to do, so do the persons that were created by Rubezahl's magic. Oh, that's not good. Welcome, stranger, to a special Halloween episode of Madame Strangeways with me, Madame Strangeways. Now, usually I share your true strange stories and give my own strange commentary along the way. But on this very special, very strange, Samhain, spectral, spooktacular, strangetacular, join me for a deep dive into the first great American ghost story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. First, we'll discuss the strange history and folklore surrounding the story, and of course, I will be dragging you down some strange rabbit holes along the way, obviously. And then, at the end, I'll narrate an abridged version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow just for you. But before we get started, a strange shout out to my Patreon patrons, TJ Hodder of the Tapes of Trepidation podcast, Gmanmusic, Ted, Keith, and Tori. Thank you so much to my feral fiendish five for supporting the show. If you would like to hear your name at the beginning of every episode and get a free sticker while you're at it, join the Patreon today at patreon.com/madamestrangeways. And now on to this bizarro Halloween strange dive on The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, here on Madame Strangeways. Happy Strangetober, everyone. I hope everyone's having a fantastically strange Strangetober. We are so close to Halloween, or Strangeoween. You know, you could call it Strangeoween. Like, that might be cool. You think that's, can we make that happen? Can we make fetch happen? Let me know. Anyway, I hope you're having a very strange Strangetober. And of course, as you know, in the Strangeverse, which is where you are right now, strange is good. So it's a good thing. I hope that you're having a pleasantly strange Strangetober. We're just going to go ahead and just jump face first. Oh, head first. Headless. Something. You see where I'm going. We're going to jump in head first, or headlessness first, into The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But really quickly, I want to thank Keith, my patron, Keith, for the suggestion of today's topic, because I wouldn't have even thought about doing an episode on The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So thank you, Keith. But also, if you're listening and you have an idea for a story, if you have an idea for just a future topic that I could talk about, let me know. Email me, madamestrangeways@gmail.com, because it could be the next episode. Who knows? You'll never know until you try. Okay, so here we go. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Published over 200 years ago in 1819 and 1820. So if you do your own research, you're going to find both years, but both are right. But the earliest time of publication was 1819. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was considered the first great American ghost story, and actually just kind of the first good, like, passable American story, period. Because remember, this isn't that far removed from the American Revolution, and I think in the UK, they kind of consider it the American Rebellion, and they were still kind of like salty about it at the time, so they didn't really think that any Americans were very good at writing. And then Washington Irving came around, and they had to go, you know what? This guy's onto something with this Headless Horseman situation. So Washington Irving, who lived from 1783 to 1859, published The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1819 as a part of a collection of stories titled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. Geoffrey spelled, of course, Geoffrey. And what does that even mean? But don't put a pin in that. We're going to come back. Who's Geoffrey Crayon, you may ask, because I also wondered. We're going to get to it. Keep your, what's a Halloween hat? What kind of hat do you, keep it on. Keep your Halloween hat on, okay? The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon is what it was published in. Also included in that book was the classic tale Rip Van Winkle. Yeah, he did that one too. Isn't that interesting? They were both in the same book, both super iconic. Irving is often considered the first great American writer. So you're probably at least passingly familiar with the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, either from the Disney animated short or from the Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci, why did I say it that way? Christina Ricci movie. Spoiler alert, the gist of the story, in case you don't know the story of why do I keep saying the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow? That's what this episode needs to be called, is the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Anyway, the story, spoiler alert, is that a weirdo named Ichabod Crane gets chased by this headless man on a horse. That's the gist of it. I don't know how else to wrap it up for you, but we're going to get into a little plot review in just a second, just to remind everyone all the beats that happen in the story. But first, like I said, you've probably seen the Disney film, or maybe you've seen Sleepy Hollow, which was the Tim Burton film, but there's also a bunch of other adaptations. So here we go. In 1922, the first adaptation was The Headless Horseman, a silent film who starred Will Rogers as a lanky Ichabod Crane. It was kind of funny. It was supposed to be humorous and probably slapstick. I didn't watch it. I was going to say slapstickian. Is that a word? We're going to go with it. I think I like it. Anyway, 1949 is when Disney made The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. We'll find out in just a moment. Why are those connected? 1999, Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. And then in the early aughts-ish, I don't remember, I didn't write this year down, a show where Ichabod Crane was like a real person and he was frozen somehow for some reason and then thawed out in modern times to help solve mysteries, because I assume the Headless Horseman is like back, and presumably Ichabod is the only one that can defeat him, even though that's not how it worked in the story. I don't know. It's a strange premise. Strange premise for a show. If you've seen it and you think I should watch it, madamestrangeways@gmail.com, let me know. I watch it, and then I get really into the show, and I'm like the number one fan. Unlikely, but possible. Stranger Things and all that. But the Disney cartoon was one of Disney's 4 package films, quote unquote. So during World War II, the studio, Disney, lost a lot of manpower and resources, which left Disney with countless unfinished ideas, too long for shorts and too short for features. So Disney, being as good at making money as it is, decided, we'll just slap 2 together that don't make any sense, and there's no reason for them to be connected otherwise, and we'll just put them together, and then we'll have a feature-length film. Great. So that's what they did with 3 other films. So I think 4 total around that time. I just thought that was so interesting how World War II impacted even animation studios at the time. Very interesting. Anyway, what I remember specifically from the Disney cartoon, which I have not watched since I was a child, but I have this like vivid recollection of being in like the school library, like around Halloween, obviously. And then the librarian wheeling out the big cart with the TV and the VCR and the VHS, and then sitting all of us down. The lights go off. And I think it was probably even like, an overcast day or something, very spooky, and then playing, the movie for us. And I genuinely don't think I've seen it since then. But what I remembered from watching it back then, if I had to tell you the plot, I guess I would say Ichabod Crane is the protagonist. He's the good guy, right? And then the Gaston-looking guy, whose name is Brom Bones, we'll get into him later. The Gaston-looking guy was kind of like not a great guy, but like not a good guy. And then obviously the Headless Horseman was the main bad guy, right? That's pretty much all I remember. And also how funny looking Ichabod Crane was made in the cartoon. That's all I really recall. But after all the reading that I have done for this episode, Ichabod's kind of a dick. Like, he's kind of a bad dude. I wrote bad dude in my script, and then I just, I was like, that isn't strong enough. He's a dick. I don't know what else to say. And it's on purpose. Like, listen, we'll get there. Anyway, we'll get into more detail about Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman and the history and the setting and Washington Irving himself. But first, let me just give you a little refresher on the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Man, also, if you can hear thunder, that's not me That's not me putting that in afterwards. That's natural. That's natural. I summoned the storm for the perfect amount of atmosphere for this episode. So you're welcome. Okay, onto the plot. So Ichabod Crane is a traveling school teacher. Yes, he looks almost exactly how they animate him in the Disney cartoon. It's canon. Like, they took like no creative freedom with his character. He looks exactly how he's described. So Ichabod is trying to court Katrina Van Tassel, which is this, of course, beautiful young 18-year-old girl in the town. And he's trying to court her specifically because, and only because, he knows that she's going to inherit a bunch of land and farms and orchards because her family are like rich farmers and they've got a lot of land. And Ichabod is trying to be a sugar baby. Ichabod is trying to find a sugar mama. And so he sees Katrina Van Tassel and he's like, yep, that's it. So that's the only reason he's trying to court her, which is rude. This is why I'm saying he's kind of a dick. So Ichabod gets an invitation to one of the Van Tassel's party. The Van Tassels, of course, being Katrina Van Tassel's family. So he's like, oh geez. Okay, this is my chance. School's out, kids. Fuck off. I gotta go. This is way more important than your education. I actually don't care about you at all. I gotta go. So he closes school down early and then he takes his weird, how do they describe it? A broken down plow horse named Gunpowder, rides that horse, poor Gunpowder, rides Gunpowder out to the farm for the Van Tassel party. So at this party, everyone is telling ghost stories because everyone in Sleepy Hollow loves ghost stories. And Brom Bones, Gaston, tells a ghost story about the most famous ghost in Sleepy Hollow, which is the Headless Horseman. You may have heard of him. So at some point in the night, off screen, Katrina Van Tassel ends up rejecting Ichabod, and he doesn't take it very well, and he sulks and he mopes his way home riding Gunpowder. And when I say home, I should also say that he just lives with all the different farmers in the town. Like, he just lives at different people's houses and moves around week to week. So he's on his way to whatever farm that he was staying at the time. Anyway, on his ride home, quote unquote, he starts getting perhaps understandably spooked because another rider on a horse has started to trail him on the ride home. And this is like not that long after he was hearing a very, very scary story about the infamous Headless Horseman chasing people at night on his horse. Obviously, I feel like that's implied. Anyway, apparently it does turn out to be the Headless Horseman who is now chasing Ichabod, and he stands up on his saddle as his horse is running, which is kind of cool. And then he throws his decapitated head at Ichabod and knocks him off of Gunpowder. And Ichabod was never heard from again. Dun, dun, dun. But actually, the book leaves it kind of vague. So it's kind of letting you decide, was the Headless Horseman just Brom Bones pranking him, being kind of an asshole, but like also he kind of deserved it, like I'm kind of on Brom's side here. Honestly, here's the thing. It's like they're pairing or they're pitting the geek and the jock against each other. I don't normally vote for the jock. Normally I'm rooting for the geek, right? But in this case, Ichabod's kind of a jerk. So I'm kind of with Brom on this one. Anyway, the book lets you decide, was it Brom Bones pranking him, or was it actually the Headless Horseman himself in the flesh? Ooh, in the spectral flesh. But actually in the book, the man telling us the story, he heard that Ichabod ended up becoming an attorney and a politician and a court justice after fleeing Sleepy Hollow and leaving all of his belongings behind because he was so scared of what happened to him that night. But others in the story say that he was never seen or heard from again. Of course, the Disney cartoon says that the Headless Horseman was definitely a ghost, like no question. So then why is Brom even in this? Anyway, we're going to move on. That's the basic gist of the story. So now we're going to discuss Ichabod Crane himself. So actually, he was named after a real person named Ichabod Crane that Washington Irving did actually meet in real life. So I saw in my research a few places that were saying, okay, this story, like the character's name is Ichabod Crane. So like, what's the meaning behind Ichabod and Crane? And I started going down that rabbit hole too, because apparently Ichabod is a name from the Bible. And so like, I'm looking at like the Bible references, I'm looking it up and I'm seeing what was his character Ichabod in the Bible? Is there some kind of connection here to the story? And like Crane is apparently an antiquated way to refer to a tall, lanky man, and Crane was tall and lanky. So I was like, okay, I'm trying to put this together for the show, for you. I wanted to be able to give you the most accurate information, but no. Irving just heard that this real man that he met, he heard the name Ichabod Crane, and he immediately wrote it down for a future story. He said, now that's a name. I mean, it's crazy. Irving had a very good, and by good I mean weird, and by weird I mean strange taste in names, as we'll come to talk about. You probably have already picked up on it. Brom Bones, Ichabod Crane, Jeffrey Crayon, even his own name, Washington Irving. What is that? Anyway, we'll get into it more. Ichabod Crane's superstitious belief, because he's easily spooked, right? Like on the ride back from the farmhouse, he's really spooked. And the reason that he's so easily spooked is that he always had his nose in a scary book, such as The History of New England Witchcraft by Cotton Mather. But actually, there is no real book by that name, although Washington Irving could be alluding to Mather's memorable providences relating to witchcrafts and possessions, which is probably true because, of course, back when this was written in 1819, you couldn't just Google it. So I feel like it's close enough. So Mather, who wrote that book, was a Puritan minister and a prolific author, though best remembered for his role in the Salem witch trials, which were between 1692 and 1693. Not very long, huh? For as much as we talk about the Salem witch trials, they didn't go on for that long. Not nearly as long as the European witch trials, which went on from 1400 to 1775, in which 100,000 people were prosecuted for witchcraft in Europe and British America. Meanwhile, the Salem witch trials, 25 people. 25 people died. Why do we talk about the Salem witch trials so much? It's kind of weird. Anyway, Mather, who wrote that book that Ichabod Crane is always reading, was a firm believer in witchcraft and the supernatural, and was an influential champion of such beliefs. So it's weird that Ichabod was reading that, because in 1790, when the story is set, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, by the way, the story is set in 1790. We'll get to that in the settings section, okay? It's further down. Anyway, in 1790, people weren't thinking about witch trials anymore, and they definitely weren't as superstitious as the character Ichabod Crane, is being. And he's supposed to be a school teacher, so why was he so superstitious? It's kind of weird, and it feels like Irving was definitely doing it on purpose. I wish that I were a smarter person that would be able to tell you kind of what he was going for there. But he's clearly trying to go somewhere, because otherwise, why would you include that detail? I think it's fascinating detail, and I think it makes him, if not a likable character, a very memorable one. So I'm going to read you the actual description that Irving wrote of Ichabod Crane, so you can see just what I mean when I say Disney took zero creative liberty with his character design. Okay, here we go. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shuffles, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weathercock, nice, perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering around him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. That's so mean. So just to be clear, the real Ichabod Crane that Irving met did not look like this. He didn't look like this. He took the name. The real Ichabod Crane is like a general or something in the Navy or the Army. I don't remember. He's a real guy, but Ichabod Crane's looks were not based on him. So how rude was that description, though? See what I mean? You're not writing a protagonist like that. Honestly, you're just not. But I'm here for it. All right, we're just going to stop very briefly on the character of Brom Bones, and I mean very briefly, but I just had to highlight, I love this fact. Brom Bones played pranks on Ichabod with his bro friends and trained a local dog to howl whenever Ichabod sang, which apparently happened more than one might imagine. Because I guess Ichabod, being the school teacher, he would also do a lot of stuff with church, and he would like lead the psalms. He would lead, I don't know. I don't know how church works, but he did a lot of stuff and he's why he sang a lot. And I guess Brom trained a local dog to howl whenever Ichabod sang. I think that is so funny. Brom, hell yeah, Brom. And when I say brief, that's all I wanted to say, because I really want to get into the Headless Horseman, because not only are we going to talk about the character in the book, we are also going to talk about all the other Headless Horsemen that exist in other cultures, and I'm very excited to talk about it. So, the Headless Horseman. I'll go ahead and open with the description from Washington Irving himself in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which describes the Headless Horseman. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region, Sleepy Hollow, and seems to be commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air, is the apparition of a figure on horseback, without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper, whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folk hurrying along in the gloom of night as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads and especially to the vicinity of a church at no great distance. Indeed, certain of the most authentic historians of those parts, who have been careful in collecting and collating the floating facts concerning this spectre, allege that the body of the trooper having been buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth to the scene of the battle in nightly quest of his head, and that the rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow, like a midnight blast, is owing to his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before dark. What's a Hessian, you ask? Put a pin in that. How many pins have we got? Are you keeping track? Let me know. madamestrangeways@gmail.com. So the Headless Horseman was a fearsome specter in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And like I said, is like the most famous ghost in Sleepy Hollow, because I tell a lot of ghost stories. This is the most famous one. So the Headless Horseman wore all black, and he had a cape, and also his horse was black. And by the way, Brom Bones' horse was also black. And Brom Bones' horse was named Daredevil. Interesting. We'll find out more. Okay, maybe I could have talked about Brom Bones more, because I'm already thinking about more details that I could add. It doesn't matter. We're moving on. We're talking about the Headless Horseman. So, what you may famously remember about the Headless Horseman is a pumpkin or a jack-o'-lantern, especially as his head, right? Which is very scary. However, in Irving's time, a pumpkin was not yet a Halloween jack-o'-lantern. Pumpkins didn't begin getting used for jack-o'-lanterns until the 1840s, after the Irish potato famine forced many Irish to immigrate to America purely so they wouldn't starve to death. And then they found the native pumpkins to be much easier to carve and use as lanterns than the traditional turnip used in Ireland. Because imagine, have you tried to carve a turnip into a jack-o'-lantern? It's difficult. It's difficult, although the effect is much spookier. I'll say that. Anyway, so listen, no, the pumpkin that the Headless Horseman used was not, in fact, a jack-o'-lantern. It was just a normal pumpkin. But presumably in the dark, a normal pumpkin would kind of seem-ish along the size of like a human head. And also it would be something easy for Brom Bones to carry on the horse with him and then throw. I'm just saying, maybe it is a ghost. Maybe it's Brom Bones. Who knows? Anyway, hold on. I got to go back to jack-o'-lanterns here for a second. Because side note for American listeners who aren't really taught much about the Great Famine that happened in Ireland, just please humor me. And look, I'm taking you down this is a strange rabbit hole. We're going down it really quickly. I'm just going to give you a strange nutshell in this strange rabbit hole. I don't know. Do rabbits eat nuts? Unclear. Doesn't matter. Moving on. You ready? We're going to talk about it. Okay. Time me, actually. You know what? Time me. Time me on the strange rabbit hole. Okay. You ready? Okay, go. The Great Famine, also known as the Great Hunger or the Irish Potato Famine, was a period of mass starvation and disease in Ireland lasting from 1845 to 1852, caused in part by an infection of potato crops by blight, Oh, I didn't look up how to say this. Phytophthora infestans throughout Europe during the 1840s. So if you're wondering why a blight on potatoes only, why a potato blight specifically and no other kind of blight would cause a famine, then gold star for you. Excellent question. And the answer to that question is that as a part of the United Kingdom at the time, the Brits exported the rest of Ireland's food production for themselves because A, that's kind of their whole thing, and B, they really didn't think very highly of the Irish, and they didn't especially seem to care if they lived or died, which is very clear now in hindsight. So it wasn't really the blight on the potatoes themselves that caused the population of Ireland to drop 1.5 million people just during the famine alone, in which 1 million people of those people died, but emigration caused further demographic collapse until it had lost half of its entire population by the 1900s, so about the span of 45 years. This nearly wiped out the Irish language itself, and if you're wondering, neither the language nor the population of Ireland have ever recovered to pre-famine rates to this day. Or you can just listen to the Sinead O'Connor song Famine, because that probably tells the story a lot better than I did. Okay, how long was that? Did you time me? Let me know, madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Okay, back to Sleepy Hollow, back to the Headless Horseman. All right, we're back. We've come out of the strange rabbit hole through the other side. So the Headless Horseman rises from his grave every night searching for his decapitated head. And the old Dutch graveyard is where he's said to roam, but he can't cross the bridge into the church. Something about holy land of the church, or, desecrated land. Desecrated? Consecrated. That's the opposite. Something about consecrated land of the church, or like crossing over a stream of water because there's a bridge there, which is something that spirits are said to not be able to cross. I don't know. It's something like that. Anyway, FYI, we're coming back to that pen from earlier about the Headless Horseman being referred to sometimes as the Galloping Hessian. We're going to get into it. What's a Hessian? What's a Hessian? I didn't know going into this. Now I know a lot about it, and now you're about to know too. Here's some condensed notes that I've taken on what is a Hessian, why, who, what, when, where, why. What is a Hessian? Why is a Hessian? How is a Hessian? Etc. So Hessians were involved in the American Revolution. Hessians were German auxiliary forces that were used during the American Revolution, or, the rebellion or whatever. So the British actually ended up using more than 30,000 German troops during the Revolutionary War. And the Hessian soldiers made up about a quarter of all the troops in the British Army, which is a lot. So also, mind you, Germany was not Germany. It was not unified. So it wasn't the Germany that we know now. I think it was 1875 that Germany became Germany, which seems like not that long ago, but that's how it worked. So while the Americans often painted the Hessians as bloodthirsty, no, we've got to pause. Hold on. Okay, Google. When did Germany become unified?
1871, according to study.com.
Okay. Here. I was close. Are you going to give me that one? Hey, is it? Come on. All right. So where were we? While the Americans often painted the Hessians as bloodthirsty mercenaries, in reality, many of the Hessians were actually forced into the army against their will. So they didn't even want to be there. But Britain had really strong ties to some of the German states in particular because King George III's family was from Hanover. Gosh, this is a whole another situation that I do not know enough about. You know what I know? I know that I don't know a lot about it. So we're not going to go into that. That's going to be a whole nother episode. What matters here is that the American colonists saw the Hessians as brutal, savage invaders. And Americans in general were outraged at the idea of King George III hiring foreign troops to subdue them. And they specifically called out this practice in the Declaration of Independence. That's how mad they were about it. So rumors quickly spread across the continent of the Hessians' ferocity and savagery. Some American riflemen were even found on Long Island impaled to trees by Hessian bayonets. And reportedly, the Hessians did not care whether or not you surrendered. They're still going to impale you. At least that's how the rumors went in the American camps for the American colonials. So Americans were pissed about the Hessians, right? Because from what I can understand, they basically just considered it cheating. They considered that Great Britain was just cheating in the war by bringing in these German Hessian soldiers, which I kind of guess I don't know enough about war to understand why they were mad. Because the one thing that I do know about war is that all's fair in it and also in love. So I don't really get why they were mad, but I can understand maybe they were mad just because they felt like they were losing and that they were like I said, they're getting impaled. So it's not good. That's another reason why that's another reason why they're mad. I mean, I'm going to give it to them. That makes total sense. Anyway, in the aftermath of the American Revolution, captured Hessians were sent to prisoner of war camps in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. And actually, the western parts of those states had already large German immigrant populations. And so many Hessians actually found that they preferred life in the Americas, even though they were there fighting for the British on the British side, because away from the harsh discipline of the German military life and surrounded by people who spoke their language and also had a similar culture, many of those Hessians who didn't even want to be in the army in the first place, they deserted. They deserted the army and they stayed in America following the war. And actually, by the end of the war, by the end of the Revolutionary War, tens of thousands of Hessians ended up staying in America. So even though you may have been living next door to an ex-Hessian soldier, and even though you may have not even realized that they were a soldier in the first place, you're still understandably scared of the concept of especially a headless Hessian soldier. I mean, like I said, Americans are already freaked out enough that they specifically mentioned the use of Hessians in the Declaration of Independence because it was such a big deal. So there you go. That's why the Headless Horseman in the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, that's why he was a Hessian soldier. However, where did the inspiration for the actual Headless Horseman come from, you may ask? Well, I'm happy to talk all about it. So just as a quick reminder, the Headless Horseman, obviously as a Hessian soldier, was said to have had his head decapitated by a cannonball. And then the head was buried separately from his body. That's why he's always out looking for his head. That's why he's always out running around. But then why is he holding on to it? Why is it on his... I have questions now. I haven't put this together until I'm just saying this out loud right now. Why does he have it if he's looking for it? Or I guess it's a pumpkin. Does he have a... There's more to unpack here, but we're just going to move forward. We're moving forward for the possible inspirations for the Headless Horseman myth. So to start, we've got the German, Czech, and Polish Rubizol. Did not look that up beforehand, so apologies, whatever the word sorry is in German. Then we've also got the infamous German pirate, Klaus Stortebaker. That sounds right. Feels right. Let me know. madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Then we've also got the Irish Dullahan. Then yet another German myth, the Wild Huntsman. And why do the Germans have so many folklore stories about Headless Horsemen, I ask you? Then there's the Scottish Ewan the Headless. Very creative. The Welsh, no, I can't do this one I gotta look this one up. Hold on. Okay, this one's tricky because I couldn't find anyone actually saying it out loud, so I'm going to try my best. The Welsh Venev Hebbing Pen. How'd I do? Let me know, madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Okay, so then I was like, okay, but why am I not finding any Headless Horsemen in, I don't know, Eurasia at a minimum? Because that's kind of where horses came from. Okay, horses actually came from the North Americas originally, and then they walked across the land bridge back when it was a Pangea situation, and then they ended up over there. But you know what I'm saying. Horses are kind of like a big deal in Eurasia. So why wouldn't there be more horsemen in general mythology in that area, like in Russia or in the Middle East? Like, what's going on? So then I had to manually search for these areas to find anything. So at a minimum, I did find the Indian myth, Thakur Baba, a warrior who was decapitated mid-battle, but stayed on his horse and kept fighting. He was a good guy, though. He's not a bad guy. That's it's a good thing that he stayed on his horse because he was fighting for his side still, which I guess are the goodies and not the baddies. Anyway, if you know of any Headless Horseman myths in any other cultures other than European, then please let me know. madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Okay, so those are the ones that I found, but we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into each one of them. They're super fascinating, but the one that seems like the most likely inspiration for Irving's Headless Horseman character is the German legend of Rubizal. Let's check. Hold please. Okay, so the Z is kind of more of a T situation, TS, so Rubitzal, all right? There it is. That's all you're going to get. That's the best one you're going to get out of me. So anyway, the Rubitzal is probably the most likely to be the actual origin story for the Headless Horseman in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But we're going to pause because just as a reminder, Sleepy Hollow or Tarrytown, that whole area, has a ton of Dutch immigrants living there. So it's like mostly Dutch, right? And so then also keep in mind that Germany was not Germany until 1871. It was not unified until 1871. So it's not the Germany that we know now, which feels like I know I mentioned it earlier, right? And I guessed it wrong. Okay, but I was pretty close. I was 4 years off. You know what? It's fine. Anyway, as another reminder, especially if you are like me, and then a few years ago you were like, where are the Dutch from? Like, where are they from? I'm actually not sure. And the answer is the Netherlands. The Dutch are from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands share a border with Germany. And so are you kind of seeing how, because it doesn't really matter if you were from Germany or if you were from the Netherlands, you probably heard the same stories if it's a German story. Like, folklore didn't just reach the border of a country and go, oh well, can't go further than that. So as you can probably imagine, that's kind of how it's possible that Washington Irving, who was living amongst all of these Dutch immigrants that were now living in America, you can understand how he might have heard the Headless Horseman myth of the Rubitzal from Germany. So I did find two different sources that tried to claim that specifically because Irving traveled in Germany in 1821 that he had become familiar with Dutch and German folklore, which is why they say that is the smoking gun as to why it's most likely that the Rubitzal is the inspiration for the Headless Horseman. But for those of you playing along at home, the story was published in 1819. So if he's traveling Germany in 1821, how is that a smoking gun? It's not. It's just not. I don't know what to tell you. So if you hear anyone try to tell you, right, what are the chances that this happens? In the very unlikely scenario that someone tries to tell you, well, actually, Washington Irving visited Germany in 1821, and that's probably when, you'll be like, You're going to put your index finger just directly on their lips to stop them talking. You're going to go, nope. No more talkie for you, because how did you not realize that the story was written in 1819, which is before he visited Germany? So I'm going to need you to just no more talkie for you. So the Legends of Rubitzal by folklorist Johann Carl August Musaus. Oh no. Don't worry about it. Who lived from 1735 to 1787. Rubitzal is a mountain spirit associated with the Krokonos Mountains. That's not how it's said, but it's spelled, there's like not enough vowels. Krkonose. Those mountains of modern Czech Republic and Poland. That's why there's not enough vowels. I'm seeing now. But you can see how far it's spread. Germany is a pretty big country, but if you're hearing the same legends that travel all the way to the Netherlands, all the way to Poland and Czech Republic, that's crazy. Anyway, Rubitzal was a popular figure in German folklore, featured in multiple tales of the supernatural. So in one interpretation from the story, how Rubitzal got his name, it recounts how Rubitzal abducted a princess who liked turnips. How are we talking about turnips again? Isn't that interesting? The princess gets very lonely there in the mountains. So to keep her company, Rubitzal turns the turnips into her friends and acquaintances. Oh, that's kind of nice, actually. As the turnips wilt after a little while, as turnips are wont to do, so do the persons that were created by Rubitzal's magic. Oh, that's not good. The princess asks him to count the turnips in the field. While he counted, she escaped. Following this explanation, some early English writers translated his name as Number Nip, as in turnip, short for turnip. That is turnip numberer. So not nearly as scary as Headless Horseman is the turnip numberer. So this is from Wikipedia. Rubensal, you should know, has the nature of a powerful genius, capricious, impetuous, peculiar, rascally, crude, immodest, haughty, vain, fickle. Today your warmest friend, tomorrow alien and cold, roguish and respectable, stubborn and flexible. Again, I think I'm going to need a supernatural romance with this guy as the main character. I'm interested. This sounds like a morally gray character. I'm here for it. I'm listening. But that is a direct description of Rubensal from the legend. Legenden von Rubensal. So in legends, Rubensal appears as a capricious giant or a gnome or a mountain spirit. Okay. With good people, he's friendly, teaching them medicine and giving them presents. But if someone derides him, however, he exacts a severe revenge. He sometimes plays the role of trickster in folk tales. So the stories originate from pagan times, and Rubensal is the fantastic lord of weather of the mountains and is similar to the Wild Hunt, which we are going to get into just a few minutes. And it's actually weird because I found the Wild Hunt through a completely different way and didn't actually know it was related to Rubensal when I first started writing about this. So isn't that interesting how this is all connected? Anyway, honestly, the more that I look into the actual legends around Rubensal, the more I'm like, I don't understand how everyone is saying that this is the most likely explanation for the Headless Horseman. You know what? I could go back and edit it and take it out where I'm saying that, but that's true. All of my research is telling me that this is the most likely explanation for the Headless Horseman. But I can't find anything in these stories about him being headless or a horseman. They're saying he looks like Gandalf the Grey or the White, but it specifically says a gray frock that he wears. He has his head in all of these depictions of paintings that I'm finding. In one of them, he's actually a demon, and he has a little weird demon tail, and he has weird demon antlers. But in none of them is he a headless horseman. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? He controls the weather, basically. And get this, in Czech fairy tales, Rubensal gave sourdough to people. He gave them sourdough. And he invented the traditional regional soup, kyselo. Okay? So how is that a bad guy? How is that a bad guy? What are we doing? Why are we blaming the Headless Horseman on a man who gave people bread and soup? Who doesn't love sourdough and soup? Come on. Why are we bad-mouthing this guy? Okay, you know what? I'm changing my assumption. I no longer think, based on the information available to me, I no longer think that this is the most likely explanation. Okay, you heard it here first, folks. This is how we do things in the Strangeverse. We change our minds, we admit when we're wrong, and we're vocal about it. We let everybody know, hey, I might have messed up. If you are more familiar with Rubensal and you think you have a reason to believe that he might have been the Headless Horseman, please let me know, madamestrangeways@gmail.com. But this is just another reason why we need to talk about every single one of the inspirations that I think may have potentially been around for the Headless Horseman. So we're going to talk about all of them. We're not going to just talk about this one. We're going to talk about all the ones that I discussed earlier. So next on the list, we have a German pirate, which I don't know why I didn't think that there were German pirates. Germany has a coast. Obviously, there were pirates that were German. It's not something that I think about. So anyway, the German pirate, the infamous pirate Klaus Stortebaker, a legendary figure similar to Robin Hood. So again, good guy. Who thinks Robin Hood's a bad guy? Okay, if you think Robin Hood's a bad guy, I'm gonna need you to reread Robin Hood. I'm gonna teach you. You are the baddies. Are we the baddies? You may ask yourself. Yes, you are if you think Robin Hood's a bad guy. So obviously, I'm also a fan of Klaus here, the pirate Klaus. So he would steal from the rich to help the poor, and he would amass and hide great treasure, and was said to, after his execution by decapitation, have patrolled in front of his shaken crew, still carrying his head in his hands. What a badass. I want to learn more about this guy, but we've got a lot of them to cover, so we're going to move on to the next one. The Scottish headless ghost, Ewan the Headless. Of course his name is Ewan. Prior to losing his head, he was known as Ewan... I forgot about this. I wrote these notes a few days ago. Hold on. Prior to losing his head, Ewan the Headless was known as Ewan with the small head. Not headless, just head small. Head tiny. Like Becky with the good hair. But Ewan with the small head. It's weird that both of his nicknames both involved heads, even before he was decapitated. Isn't that weird? Okay. Anyway, he was a big man baby from what I can tell in my reading. He was a big man baby who talked shit to a creepy fairy and then died in battle because of said shit talking to said creepy fairy. And now, whenever his descendants die on his land, his family's land, he reappears to guide their souls to the afterlife or somewhere. It's not really clear where he guides them, but he guides them, and that's when he shows back up, is when someone dies. So I guess there are worse circumstances that he could show up for. Anyway, next on the list is the Welsh Venw heb un pen, which translates to the headless woman. So we have a headless woman. I'm so excited. Anyway, she rides the Ceffyl heb un pen, which if heb un pen sounds familiar, it's because I just said it, and that's because heb un pen means without a head. So that's right. The headless woman, the headless Welsh woman, rides a headless horse. What are the odds? What are the odds? I love it. This is already my favorite one, and it's not just because I have a weird fascination with Welsh. That's not why. Come on. It's, first of all, she's the first headless woman in the story that we've been talking about. And then also she rides a horse without a head. All right. So Bryn Hall in Llanymawdwy. Llanymawdwy. If you're Welsh, email me madamestrangeways@gmail.com so that I can apologize to you personally. Bryn Hall in Llanymawdwy is said to have been haunted by a headless horseman. I think woman, we now know, which only came to an end when one of the hall's servants discerned a message from the horse woman, identifying the location of a buried body. The body was said to be that of an illegitimate child fathered by the Lord of Bryn Hall. Isn't that interesting? Also, as Wales shares cultural similarities with Cornwall, it is possible that a version of the Welsh horsewoman, or a Cornish equivalent, may have been what was known to the parents of Washington Irving, who came from Cornwall. There's another way that Washington Irving might have heard this story. This is actually turning out, you know what? This is actually turning out to be my pet theory. I reject the German Rubitzal, but I do still want him as the protagonist in a supernatural romance. However, I'm leaning this way. I'm leaning in the direction of the Welsh headless horsewoman. Just a thought. Anyway, so Wikipedia has a section about an English headless horseman myth, and it says English, so like England, whatever above it. But then I go on to read it, and then it discusses the Green Knight, an Arthurian legend. And King Arthur is Welsh, and the King Arthur legends are Welsh. So what is this Welsh erasure in 2025? What is this? Is this Victorian times? What is this? So listen, if you like to submit edits on Wikipedia, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask you to suggest that they change that Headless Horseman article title from English Headless Horseman to specifically the Welsh section. And you know what? If Wikipedia accepts that edit, I will send you a Madame Strangeways sticker in the mail. Email me. Email me a screenshot of your successful Wikipedia edit to madamestrangeways@gmail.com. I will send you a sticker because that is how confident I am that that is wrong. And I specifically, before you ask, I did Google, I double checked that the Green Knight story is not some of the English fan fiction that's written about King Arthur. No. It is some of the original Welsh stories. So anyway, here's the Green Knight in Arthurian legend. From Wikipedia, in Camelot on New Year's Eve, King Arthur's court is exchanging gifts and waiting for the feastings to start, when all of a sudden a giant figure, entirely green in appearance and riding a green horse, again, it's like the headless woman riding a headless horse. No, it's a green man riding a green horse. Interesting. Rides unexpectedly into the hall. He wears no armor, but wears an axe in one hand and bears an axe in one hand and a holly bough in the other. So refusing to fight anyone there on the grounds that they are all too weak, he insists that he has come for a friendly Christmas game, which is, when you find out what he says, it's not very friendly and it doesn't sound like a game. Someone is to strike him once with his axe on the condition that the Green Knight may return the blow in a year and a day. The axe will then belong to whoever accepts the deal. So King Arthur is like, I don't see anyone else volunteering. I guess it's got to be me then, because I can't let no one take this challenge. I'll have to take it. But then Sir Gawain, the youngest of Arthur's knights and Arthur's nephew, asks for the honor instead. Of course, like the young upstart decides he wants to prove himself, right? Like, child, please sit down. So the giant, the Green Knight, the Green Giant, is he jolly? Oh my God. Is this where the Jolly Green Giant comes from? Okay, moving on. The giant bends and bares his neck before him, and Gawain neatly beheads him in one stroke, which is interesting because what do you mean? Why would you behead him? Why not just give him a little nick? You know, just a little slice. That's like not a big deal. You just put a Band-Aid on it if you're going to get the same blow in a year and a day. Anyway, all right, it doesn't matter. We're moving on. So he beheads the Green Knight. And then, however, the Green Knight neither falls nor falters, but instead reaches out, picks up his severed head, and mounts his green horse. So the Green Knight shows his bleeding head to Queen Guinevere, while it reminds Gawain that the two must meet again at the Green Chapel in a year and a day before the knight rides away. And Gawain and Arthur admire the axe, hang it up as a trophy, and encourage Guinevere to treat the whole matter lightly. Like, don't worry, honey, it's fine. Poor Guinevere. Why did he show Guinevere? You'll find out because I've already read this. So as the date approaches, Sir Gawain leaves to find the Green Chapel and keep his part of the bargain. So he goes on some adventures and some battles and just vaguely like glossed over. Anyway, he shows up at this castle, and there's the Lord of the castle and the Lord's beautiful wife, who are very happy to have such a renowned guest as one of Arthur's knights. So also present is this old and ugly lady. Not my words, unnamed, but treated with great honor by all. So Gawain tells them of his New Year's Eve appointment at the Green Chapel with the Green Giant, and that he's going to get his head chopped off. The Lord laughs and explains that, like, oh yeah, there's a path over here. It'll take you to the chapel in less than 2 miles. And why don't you just rest here and hang out until you go to meet your doom? Cool. So Gawain hangs out at the castle, and then the Lord of the castle decides to propose a bargain to him. So the Lord is like, I'm going to go hunting every day, and I will give you whatever I capture on my hunt on the condition that you, Sir Gawain, give me whatever you gain during your day here in my castle. Interesting. Gawain accepts, of course. So after, however, the Lord leaves, his wife, the beautiful wife, visits Gawain's bedroom and behaves seductively and temptingly. But despite her best efforts, Gawain allows her nothing but a single kiss. So when the Lord returns from his hunting and gives Gawain the deer that he has killed on his hunting trip, Gawain has to then give him what he got at the castle while he was out hunting, which is a kiss. So Gawain gives him a kiss without divulging its source. I think I also need to read this book. This is also a book I need to read. I understand this is classic literature. That's mythology. Okay, it's a joke. I'm making jokes. All right, anyway, the next day, the beautiful wife of the Lord returns to Gawain, who again courteously foils her advances. And later that day, there was a similar exchange of a hunted boar from the Lord, because that's what he caught on his hunting that day. And so then Gawain then had to give the Lord 2 kisses. The Lord is not questioning. The Lord is not asking any questions in this story, which I find interesting. So then again, of course, because it's always in threes. So the lovely lady comes once more on the 3rd evening, but once again, her advances are denied. And so she offers Gawain a gold ring as a keepsake. Keepsake? keepsake. He gently but steadfastly refuses, but she pleads that he at least take her sash, which is a girdle of green and gold silk. So the sash, the lady assures him, is charmed and will keep him safe from all physical harm. Tempted, because he's thinking he's about to get his head chopped off the next day, Gawain takes it, and they exchange 3 kisses instead of the usual 1 or 2. Again, it's always 3s, right? So the lady has Gawain swear that he will keep the gift of the sash secret from her husband. So that evening, her husband shows back up with a fox from his hunt. He gives it to Gawain. Gawain then gives him 3 kisses. He's now given this man 5 kisses, no questions. But notably, Gawain does not give him the sash. It doesn't mention the gold ring, though. So I don't know where the gold ring went. Anyway, the next day, Sir Gawain binds the sash around his waist. So outside of the Green Chapel, he finds the Green Knight sharpening an axe, waiting for him so that he can visit the same blow that Gawain gave to him, which is, of course, beheading him. So as promised, Gawain bends his bared neck to receive his blow. At the first swing, Gawain flinches slightly, and the Green Knight belittles him for it. Like, oh my God, I just picturing like, ha ha. That's so mean. Ashamed of himself, Gawain does not flinch from the second swing, but again, the Green Knight withholds the full force of his blow. So the Green Knight explains that he was testing Gawain's nerve. Angrily, Gawain tells him to deliver his blow, and so the Knight does, causing only a slight wound on Gawain's neck, which is what I'm saying Gawain should have done in the first place. Isn't that interesting? And so the game is done, because it only causes a slight wound on his neck. I don't know why. Gawain seizes his sword, helmet, and shield, but the Green Knight, laughing, reveals himself to be none other than the Lord of the Castle, who was transformed by magic. He explains that the entire adventure was just a trick of the unnamed ugly elderly lady that Gawain saw at the castle, who was actually the sorceress Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's stepsister, who intended to test Arthur's knights and frighten Guinevere to death, which you see now is why the Green Knight decided to show the bloody head to Guinevere. The nick Gawain suffered at the third stroke was because of his attempt to conceal the gift of the sash. Gawain is ashamed to have behaved deceitfully, but the Green Knight laughs and pronounces him the most blameless knight in all the land. Isn't that lovely? I'm going to be honest, I probably didn't need to read you that entire story of the Green Knight, but I thought it was too interesting not to tell you, especially when Gawain is just kissing this lord every night. Like, what am I supposed to not tell you that story after I read it? Sorry, not sorry. All right, moving on. Others have pointed to other older, vaguely European traditions for the story of the Headless Horseman, arguing that Washington Irving was inspired by legends of the Wild Huntsman, who is purportedly a ghostly rider who terrified nighttime travelers with his pack of hounds in medieval Germany. Again, we're in Germany. Why are we always in Germany? However, I was trying to find anything about the Wild Huntsman, and I couldn't really find anything, but it kept bringing me to the Wild Hunt, which we mentioned earlier. Remember that pin that we put in that earlier? Well, now you can take that pin out because we're going to talk about it. So the Wild Hunt happened in Northeast Europe, which doesn't seem to actually be involving any Headless Horseman in particular, but it did involve Rubensal, who, as we said, I couldn't actually figure out why he has anything to do with the Headless Horseman myth. But you know what? Here's the thing, is this story is just really cool, so we're going to talk about it. So the Wild Hunt flies through the sky and is made up of black hounds and wolves. Sometimes even werewolves were depicted as stealing beer and sometimes food from houses. Horses were portrayed as 2, 3, 6, and 8-legged, often with fiery eyes, with flocks of crows and ravens overhead, sometimes led by the devil himself. How badass is that? How badass is that? So cool. It actually used to be led by Odin, or at least people associated with Odin, and instead of demons and werewolves, it originally involved a chase led by a mythological figure escorted by a ghostly or supernatural group of non-demonic deities engaged in some sort of spectral hunt. But as you know, this is how Christianity and Catholicism handled anything remotely pagan, is they made it scary and they made it demonic. So it wasn't always demonic or scary. It used to just be Norse mythology. It used to just be Norse pagan beliefs. Jacob Grimm of the Brothers fame, and also a folklorist, believed that under the influence of Christianization, which is a word that I did not just make up. It sounds like I did. I'm not being sarcastic. It really is a word. The Wild Hunt story was converted from being that of a solemn march of gods to being a pack of horrid specters dashed with dark and devilish ingredient. And some suggest that the Wild Hunt actually influenced our modern day Santa Claus. Listen, I prefer the Wild Hunt to Santa Claus, I'm going to be honest. Okay, we're going to pop on over to Ireland. And according to legend, the Dullahan is an Irish legend of an evil fairy headless horseman. Now remember, fairies are generally not good characters in a lot of Celtic, especially folklore. Fairies are kind of bad guys and they're sneaky, and especially this one is evil. So just keep that in mind. So the Dullahan is an Irish legend of an evil fairy headless horseman who seems to be the harbinger of death. His name means dark man in Gaelic. The Dullahan originated around the 6th century in Ireland. This is so cool, he uses a human spine as a horsewhip, and the head he carries under his arm has the consistency of molded cheese. Which is so cool. The Brothers Grimm actually wrote 2 similar headless horseman tales based specifically on this Irish headless horseman, including a tale of an unlucky woman who sees the monster and the tale of a headless horseman whose hunting horn warns hunters of impending doom. So this next bit is from Rutgers University Camden. Again, this is something that, did I need to include it? Probably not, but it's really interesting. So I'm going to read it. So in ancient medieval Ireland, the High King Tigernmus, we're going to go with that. The High King Tigernmus, who lived from 1621 until 1544 BC, would conduct various sacrificial rituals to the evil deity named Crom Cruach, which, does that not sound kind of like Brom? Brom Bones? It's an alliteration. Same with Crom Cruach. Okay. The most common form of pagan sacrifice was human decapitation, and this practice would go on for centuries until the 5th century AD, when St. Patrick ended the practice and brought Christianity into Irish culture, which is a whole nother, I'm not getting into this right now. I'm not getting into this. Okay, I'm going to get into it a little bit. St. Patrick was not Irish. He was English. And when he drove the snakes out of Ireland, the snakes were the Irish. The snakes were the Irish. So St. Patrick, not really a good guy. Anyway, St. Patrick ended the practice of decapitations according to Rutgers University. This is not me. This is Rutgers. St. Patrick ended the practice of decapitation for sacrificial purposes and brought Christianity into Irish culture. As legend goes, Crom Cruach took on a human form and became the Dullahan to search for souls he could now take, now that they were no longer being given to him through sacrificial means. The Dullahan's appearance is said to be of a decapitated horseman holding a moldy-looking head under his arm, like the cheese, right? Moldy-looking cheese, weird, with his eyes darting in many directions, which honestly, I feel like that's the scariest part so far that we've talked about, is the eyes darting in different directions in the decapitated head. The Dullahan is possessed with supernatural sight, allowing him to see all of the Irish countryside to stalk his next victim. Whenever the Dullahan stops riding, he speaks the name of his next victim and claims his or her soul. Each ride, the Dullahan's head has only enough energy to speak that of its next victim's name to preserve its energy for its hunt. It is also said that whoever looks upon his face while he is riding for his victim either becomes blind or is marked with blood as the Dullahan's next victim. There's only one way to ward off this ancient Irish fairy, and that is by throwing gold in his direction, which I'm going to say, if you want to ward me away, that is also a really good way to do that. That's how you can ward me away. Okay, I know I said I was leaning towards the Welsh story actually being the most likely reason that Washington Irving made the Headless Horseman. This one feels really compelling as well. This one feels, especially Crom Cruach, or man, I know I'm butchering that. Again, if you're Irish and you speak Gaelic of any sort, you don't have to be Irish. If you speak any kind of Gaelic, email me, madamestrangeways@gmail.com. I will personally apologize to you as well. Or anyone that I have offended with my terrible pronunciation. I'm trying, you guys, please, I'm trying. Anyway, I'm kind of leaning towards this one. I'm leaning towards the Dullahan. Honestly, like, this is feeling, I don't know. But we're not even done. We have one more. One more. Okay, one more. Because something that I was reading specifically said that it was probably Sir Walter Scott's poem, The Chase, that was a direct inspiration for Washington Irving to create the Headless Horseman. So Sir Walter Scott, who also happens to be an actual Scot, so he was Scottish, he was friends with Irving. And from what I understand, Sir Walter Scott translated an old German poem, again, Germany. What's going on? It's not just a short poem, it's a very long poem that Sir Scott translated about a devil chasing this guy just forever and ever, just endlessly chasing him. I pulled up the poem and I skimmed it, and I did do like a Control F looking for the word headless. You know, I was trying to find any sort of like, is there a headless horseman in the story? Is that come on, is there anything? So I did do a Control F for headless, which came up with nothing. So I tried just head, and it did pull up this first instance of the word head in the poem. Quote unquote, here's the quote. And when the brig of Turk was won, the headmost horseman rode alone. Headmost horseman. Most being the opposite of less, right? The headmost instead of headless horseman. That's the opposite of headless. Headmost. It just means like the first horseman of the group of horsemen, right? But honestly, maybe Washington Irving saw the phrase headmost because, you know, he had a really good eye for weird names, right? And like things that he could just tuck away to use in a story later. Honestly, I think it's completely possible that Washington Irving saw the phrase headmost horseman and was like, I like that. I like, it's got a ring to it. But like, wait, what if we flipped it and it was headless horseman? Dun, dun, dun. I don't know. I mean, it could be, you know, it could also be a combination of any of these. It could be a combination with Rubitzal. It could be a combination with the Green Knight in Arthurian legend, or with the headless woman. It could be a combination of everything, because isn't that what America, especially early America, was? Just like a melting pot. Totally possible. So let me know. Let me know. We're moving on to setting in history, but before we do that, let me know, madamestrangeways@gmail.com, which of these stories do you think inspired Washington Irving for the Headless Horseman? Let me know. So the legend of Sleepy Hollow takes place about 14 years after the end of the American Revolution, which is not that far. That's not that long after. So just, you know, like I said, the Hessians, those are still on everyone's mind. Also, Americans are feeling very patriotic, but they're also kind of having something of an identity crisis of sorts, because so much of their culture, like I said, is a melting pot, and it's basically just hand-me-downs from the cultures that they came to America with. So that's partly why Washington Irving writing this first great American ghost story is such a big deal, because there wasn't really like American culture, because it was all borrowed or stolen, some might say. But as you can see, he did just take it from somewhere else in Europe. So, you know, it's fine. Don't worry about it. That's just the American way. It's the American way. But Sleepy Hollow, the town, you may read in some places, if you are so interested in doing such things, Sleepy Hollow is sometimes said to either be one of two towns. Like some people say it was Kinderhook, and some people say it was actually Tarrytown. And, you know, we don't know. Who knows? Well, no, it's pretty well documented. So the original name for the village of North Tarrytown was Sleepy Hollow. Officials changed the name from Sleepy Hollow to North Tarrytown in 1883. But in 1996, they changed it back to the original Sleepy Hollow, not to settle the dispute that was happening with the nearby Kinderhook, where U.S. President Martin Van Buren wrongly insisted that Sleepy Hollow was based on Kinderhook because he just wanted it to be. But actually they changed the name back to Sleepy Hollow to capitalize on its name to attract tourists, because the General Motors plant in Tarrytown, aka Sleepy Hollow, closed. So if the town didn't do something drastic, it was going to become even more of a ghost town than before. Ooh, real ghosts. No, not real ghosts. Ooh, not real ghosts. The Headless Horseman is the ghost. But it would be a ghost town because GM plant made everyone have to leave. Do you see what I mean? Okay. But imagine buying a car that was assembled in Sleepy Hollow. Imagine. They still have to be kicking. Like if this was 1996-ish that the GM plant closed, someone still has to own a car. Let me know, madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Do you have a car, a GM car, that could have possibly been assembled in Sleepy Hollow prior to 1996? I can't wait to find out. Is it haunted? Let me know. So Tarrytown / Sleepy Hollow is a real place in New York's lower Hudson Valley, and the first Europeans to settle in the region were Dutch farmers, fur trappers, and fishermen around the year 1645. So when the legend of Sleepy Hollow begins, around 1790, the town would have already had about 150 years of history, which in American terms is a long time. That is a very long time. In European history, that's just like a blip. It's just not that much time. Also, fun fact, the high school sports, the high school sports team, I assume football, but did not check. The high school sports team is the Horsemen. Isn't that fun? So I kind of accidentally included all the other history points in some of the other conversations that we've been having. So that section is now done. Easy. Next, moving on to Washington Irving himself. So Washington Irving, born 1783, died 1859, published The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1819 as part of a collection of stories titled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. We are here again. Remember, so long ago now I told you to put a pin in it. Now take that pin out. We're addressing the pin. So like I said, he is often considered the first great American writer, which, mind you, at the time of publishing in 1819, Edgar Allan Poe was only 10 years old. Walt Whitman was 0 years old. And prior to this, most of the writing that came out of America since the 1700s was just founding fathers yapping, a bunch of hyper-religio stuff. And, the history of the expedition, hold on. The history of the expedition under the command of the captains Lewis and Clark in 1814. But that wasn't fiction, so they didn't really consider it to be the first great American novel. Irving was one of the first American writers to earn acclaim in Europe, and he encouraged other American authors such as Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, that's a long name for a Longfellow, Herman Melville, and, like I said, Edgar Allan Poe. So he was also admired by some British writers, which is a big deal because the Brits just didn't think very highly of us at all. So some British writers that admire him included Lord Byron, Thomas Campbell, Charles Dickens, Mary Shelley, Francis Jeffrey, and Walter Scott. He also advocated for writing as a legitimate profession, so kudos to him, and he argued for stronger laws to protect American writers from copyright infringement. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan. When he died in 1859, he was actually buried in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery because he ended up moving back there later in his life. Now, you may have wondered earlier who the heck Geoffrey Crayon is in the book titled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, because I told you just probably 1 minute ago that we were going to address the pen, and then I kind of kept talking. So here we are, we're back to the pen. Well, Washington Irving, a man with an already kind of weird name, Washington Irving, his first name being named after George Washington, but he wasn't named George Irving, he was named Washington Irving, which is interesting. But this man loved pen names. He loved pen names. He used so many nom de plumes. It's kind of crazy. He even loved especially weird ones. Those were his favorite ones to come up with. These are just a few that I found, but I bet that there's more. These are some of the names. He loves an alliteration. Loves them. William Wizard. Lancelot. Langstaff. Actually, it's like Launce a lot. Lau. Lancelot Langstaff. But you know what that means? To me, that is giving more credence to the Arthur tale, to the King Arthur tale. I feel like Wales is now, it's now winning in my head of, okay, there's just something there. Okay, the next, Geoffrey Crayon, Esquire, not just Geoffrey Crayon. And if you're curious, no, crayons had not been invented yet. Did I say that earlier? If not, I meant to. Crayons had not yet been invented. Just FYI. So Geoffrey Crayon, and remember Geoffrey is how he spells it. Geoffrey Crayon, Esquire. Esquire means he's an attorney or a lawyer. It's one of those. Then also Diedrich Knickerbocker, which we're going to talk more about in just a moment. Then Jonathan Oldstyle, Gent. I assume that's a title just like Esquire, meaning he's a gentleman. Does that mean he's a landed? Maybe he's part of the gentry. I didn't go down that rabbit hole. Do you want me to? No, you don't, because we're already over an hour. So we're just going to continue. Then finally, the last name that I found, and this one he used in Spain, I think when he was writing about the Alhambra, Fray Antonio Agapita. Okay. Doodaloo. This is Madame Strangeways from the future, in which I am editing this episode and realize I did not actually tell you who Geoffrey Crayon is. So here we go, back from the future, which is similar to the movie. Anyway, Geoffrey Crayon is just this fictional world traveler character that he came up with. Geoffrey Crayon. He sailed, fictionally. He fictionally sailed from America to England and explored the English countryside and visited new places and met with families and sat down and learned their local customs and etc., etc. So there it is. The very anticlimactic answer to the question, who is Geoffrey Crayon? That's it. All right, back to the past. Doodaloo. So Irving completed A History of New York from the Beginning of the World to the End of the Dutch Dynasty by Diedrich Knickerbocker in 1809. The by Diedrich Knickerbocker is the part where he's using a pen name, except he's also assuming a completely different fictional fabricated character in writing this history. So he's writing this history of New York as if he is a man named Diedrich Knickerbocker, and he doesn't sign his name on it at all. So that was his first major book, and it happened to be a satire on self-important local history and contemporary politics. So I've heard him described a little bit as like Mad Magazine, but in the early 1800s. So before its publication, Irving started a hoax about this book about Diedrich Knickerbocker, this is why this is such a big name. So Irving started a hoax by placing a series of missing person advertisements or if you're from the UK, advertisements, in the New York Evening Post, seeking information on Diedrich Knickerbocker, on the whereabouts of Diedrich Knickerbocker, who was purportedly a crusty Dutch historian who had allegedly gone missing from his hotel in New York City. And as a part of the ruse, he placed a notice from the hotel's proprietor informing readers that if Mr. Knickerbocker failed to return to the hotel to pay his bill, he would publish a manuscript that Knickerbocker had left behind. This is a masterclass in marketing. This is like the Blair Witch Project marketing all over again, where they put up wanted posters and missing posters for the three characters in the Blair Witch Project, and then had all these like fake documentaries about the Blair Witch and about the missing kids. Like, this is such good marketing, and he was just a one-man show. So unsuspecting readers followed the story of Knickerbocker and his manuscript with interest, and some New York City officials were concerned enough about the missing historian to offer a reward for his safe return. I cannot stress enough, Diedrich Knickerbocker was not real, and no one was missing. But New York City officials were so convinced that they were offering a reward. Irving then published A History of New York on December 6, 1809, under the Knickerbocker pseudonym, which was met with immediate critical and popular success. So basically, this is from Irving. Irving says, it took with the public and gave me celebrity, as an original work was something remarkable and uncommon in America. So the name Deirdre Knickerbocker became a nickname for Manhattan residents in general and was adopted by the New York Knickerbockers basketball team. And if that wasn't enough, Washington Irving also gave New York City the nickname Gotham, which is an Anglo-Saxon word meaning goat's town. So Batman fans, you have Washington Irving to thank for Gotham ever existing. So bringing this back to Sleepy Hollow, the man telling the story in the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, in the book, the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, who do you think was the person that was actually telling the story? It wasn't Geoffrey Crayon. It was Deirdre Knickerbocker was the one telling us the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. So as you can see, there is sort of this weird Washington Irving literary universe, basically, for lack of a better term. And what I found especially interesting about this is that typically my deep dive episodes are about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the alleged demonologists / paranormal investigators who, if you've listened to any of my previous episodes about the Warrens, I do not believe a single word that comes out of either of their mouths. So I find it interesting that what you find in a lot of the Warren stories is that Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren, but more to a greater extent, Ed Warren is just creating his own Warren paranormal universe. He's writing his own lore. He's making everything up, and he's selling these stories that are definitely not real, but people are fully buying into it. And then somehow the one other unrelated story that I'm doing that has nothing to do with the Warrens that was suggested to me by Keith, my patron, happens to also involve a man who makes up stories and tricks people into believing them. The difference, of course, being that Washington Irving didn't do any harm. His was out of pure whimsy. That's the difference. Washington Irving was doing this out of whimsy. The Warrens were doing it out of greed, and they were fearmongers. And I do not like a fearmonger. That's why I like Washington Irving. I'm a fan of Washington Irving after doing all this research. So there it is. That is the history, the folklore, the background of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. There that is. I also want to make a note before we get to the story that there are at least 3 parts in my notes where I typed Sleepy Holly instead of Sleepy Hollow. And why? Sleepy Holly. Everyone knows the legend of Sleepy Holly. I was tired. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, so now I will be regaling you with a narration of an abridged version, because it's a very long story. It is an abridged version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Keep in mind, sometimes it just jumps. Sometimes something is happening and it's just going to jump to the next spot in the story. And you know the story, though. You remember, right? Ichabod Crane, he's a school teacher. He is invited to Katrina Van Tassel's party at her family's house. He wants to marry her because he wants her vast tracts of land. Then he gets spooked by hearing a story about the Headless Horseman told by Brom Bones, who is also competing with him for Katrina Van Tassel's hand. Then on his way back, after he is turned down by Katrina Van Tassel, when he's riding his horse back home, a strange, scary rider starts tailing him. And then it turns out to be the Headless Horseman. Or does it? We'll find out in this abridged version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, written by Washington Irving. But before I get started, I also just want to make sure everybody has a really happy Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And I hope everyone had a great Strangetober. Oh, did you hear that thunder? Very realistic. It sounds like it's about to rain hellcats and hellhounds out there. So, you know what that means. On to our not true at all strange Halloween story here on Madame Strangeways. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, abridged by Washington Irving. In this byplace of nature, there abode in a remote period of American history, that is to say, some 30 years since, A worthy wight, narrator's note here, that's W-I-G-H-T, meaning a person of a specified kind, especially one regarded as unfortunate. A worthy wight of the name of Ichabod Crane, who sojourned, or as he expressed it, tarried in Sleepy Hollow for the purpose of instructing the children of the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state which supplies the Union with pioneers for the mind as well as for the forest, and sends forth yearly its legions of frontier woodsmen and country schoolmasters. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering about, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. When school hours were over, he was even the companion and playmate of the larger boys, and on holiday afternoons would convoy some of the smaller ones home who happened to have pretty sisters, or good housewives for mothers, noted for the comforts of the cupboard. Indeed, it behooved him to keep on good terms with his pupils. The revenue arising from his school was small, and would have been scarcely sufficient to furnish him with daily bread, for he was a huge feeder, and though lank, had the dilating powers of an anaconda. But to help out his maintenance, he was, according to country custom in those parts, boarded and lodged at the houses of the farmers whose children he instructed. With these he lived successively a week at a time, thus going the rounds of the neighborhood, with all his worldly effects tied up in a cotton handkerchief. From his half-itinerant life, also, he was kind of a traveling gazette, carrying the whole budget of local gossip from house to house, so that his appearance was always greeted with satisfaction. He was, moreover, esteemed by the women as a man of great erudition, for he had read several books quite through, and was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he most firmly and potently believed. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple credulity. His appetite for the marvelous and his powers of digesting it were equally extraordinary, and both had been increased by his residence in this spellbound region. No tale was too gross or monstrous for his capacious swallow. It was often his delight, after his school was dismissed in the afternoon, to stretch himself on the rich bed of clover bordering the little brook that whimpered by his schoolhouse, and there con over old Mather's direful tales until the gathering of dusk of the evening made the printed page a mere mist before his eyes. Then, as he wended his way by swamp and stream and awful woodland to the farmhouse where he happened to be quartered, every sound of nature at that witching hour fluttered his excited imagination. The moan of the whippoorwill from the hillside, the boding cry of the tree-toad, that harbinger of storm, the dreary hooting of the screech-owl, or the sudden rustling in the thicket of birds frightened from their roost. The fireflies, too, which sparkled most vividly in the darkest places, now and then startled him, as one of uncommon brightness would stream across his path, and, if by chance a huge blockhead of a beetle came winging his blundering flight against him, the poor varlet was ready to give up the ghost, with the idea that he was struck with a witch's token. His only resource on such occasions, either to drown thought or to drive away evil spirits, was to sing psalm tunes, and the good people of Sleepy Hollow, as they sat by their doors of an evening, were often filled with awe at hearing his nasal melody, in linked sweetness long drawn out, floating from the distant hill or along the dusky road. All these, however, were mere terrors of the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in darkness, and though he had seen many spectres in his time, and been more than once beset by Satan in divers shapes in his lonely perambulations, yet daylight put an end to all these evils, and he would have passed a pleasant life of it, in despite of the devil and all of his works, if his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together, and that was a woman. Among the musical disciples who assembled to receive his instructions in psalmody was Katrina van Tassel, the daughter and only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. She was a blooming lass of fresh 18, plump as a partridge, ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches, and universally famed, not merely for her beauty, but her vast expectations. She was withal a little of a coquette, as one might be... She was withal a little of a coquette, as might be perceived even in her dress, which was a mixture of ancient and modern fashions as most suited to set off her charms. She wore the ornaments of pure yellow gold, which her great-great-grandmother had brought over from Saardam, the tempting stomacher of the olden time, and withal a provokingly short petticoat to display the prettiest foot and ankle in the country round. As the enraptured Ichabod fancied all of this, and as he rolled his great green eyes over the fat meadowlands, the rich fields of wheat, of rye, of buckwheat, and Indian corn, and the orchards burthened with ruddy fruit, which surrounded the warm tenement of Van Tassel, his heart yearned after the damsel who was to inherit these domains, and his imagination expanded with the idea how they might be readily turned into cash, and the money invested in immense tracts of wild land and shingle palaces in the wilderness. Nay, his busy fancy already realized his hopes, and presented to him the blooming Katrina, with a whole family of children, mounted on the top of a wagon loaded with household trumpery, with pots and kettles dangling beneath, and he beheld himself bestriding a pacing mare, with a colt at her heels, setting out for Kentucky, Tennessee, or the Lord knows where. Ichabod was a suitable figure for such a steed. He rode with short stirrups which brought his knees nearly up to the pommel of his saddle. His sharp elbows stuck out like grasshoppers. He carried his whip perpendicularly in his hand, like a scepter, and, as his horse jogged on, the motion of his arms was not unlike the flapping of a pair of wings. A small wool hat rested on the top of his nose, for so his skinty strip of forehead might be called, and the skirts of his black coat fluttered out almost to the horse's tail. Such was the appearance of Ichabod and his steed as they shambled out of the gate of Hans Van Ripper, and it was altogether such an apparition as is seldom to be met in broad daylight. It was, as I have said, a fine autumnal day. The sky was clear and serene, and nature wore that rich and golden livery which was always associated with the idea of abundance. The forests had put on their sober brown and yellow, while some trees of the tenderer kind had been nipped by the frosts into brilliant dyes of orange, purple, and scarlet. Streaming files of wild ducks began to make their appearance high in the air. The bark of the squirrel might be heard from the groves of the beech and hickory nuts, and the pensive whistle of the quail at intervals from the neighboring stubble field. Brom Bones, however, was the hero of the scene, having come to the gathering on his favorite steed, Daredevil, a creature, like himself, full of mettle and mischief, and which no one but himself could manage. He was, in fact, noted for preferring vicious animals, given to all kinds of tricks, which kept the rider in constant risk of his neck, for he held a tractable, well-broken horse as unworthy of a lad of spirit. The immediate cause, however, of the prevalence of supernatural stories in these parts was doubtless owing to the vicinity of Sleepy Hollow. There was a contagion in the very air that blew from the haunted region. It breathed forth an atmosphere of dreams and fancies infecting all the land. Several of the Sleepy Hollow people were present at Van Tassel's and, as usual, were doling out their wild and wonderful legends. Many dismal tales were told about funeral trains, and mourning cries, and wailing, heard and seen about the great tree where the unfortunate Major Andre was taken, and which stood in the neighborhood. Some mention was also made of the woman in white that haunted the dark glen at Raven Rock. and was often heard to shriek on winter nights before a storm, having perished there in the snow. The chief part of the stories, however, turned upon the favorite specter of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman, who had been heard several times of late, patrolling the country, and, it was said, tethered his horse nightly among the graves in the churchyard. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that Ichabod had heard in the afternoon now came crowding back upon his recollection. The night grew darker and darker. The stars seemed to sink deeper in the sky, and driving clouds occasionally hid them from his sight. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was, moreover, approaching the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid. In the center of the road stood an enormous tulip tree, which towered like a giant above all other trees of the neighborhood, and formed a kind of landmark. Its limbs were gnarled and fantastic, large enough to form trunks for ordinary trees, twisting down almost to the earth and rising again into the air. Ichabod, who had no relish for this strange midnight companion, and bethought himself of the adventures of Brom Bones with the galloping Hessian, now quickened his steed in hopes of leaving him behind. The stranger, however, quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking to lag behind. The other did the same. His heart began to sink within him. He endeavored to resume his psalm tune, but his parched tongue clove to the roof of his mouth, and he could not utter a stave. There was something in the moody and dogged silence of this pertinacious companion that was mysterious and appalling. It was soon fearfully accounted for. On mounting a rising ground which brought the figure of his fellow traveler in relief against the sky, gigantic in height and muffled in a cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was even more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of the saddle. His terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, hoping by a sudden movement to give his companion the slip, but the spectre started at full jump with him. Away they dashed through thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lanky body away over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. The wavering reflection of a silver star in the bosom of the brook told him that he was not mistaken. He saw the walls of the church dimly glaring under the trees beyond. He recollected the place where Brom Bones's ghostly competitor had disappeared. If I can but reach that bridge, thought Ichabod, I am safe. Just then he heard the black steed panting and blowing close behind him. He even fancied that he felt his hot breath. After a convulsive kick in the ribs, an old Gunpowder sprang upon the bridge. He thundered over the resounding planks. He gained the opposite side, and now Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish according to rule in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups and in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash. He was tumbled headlong into the dust, and Gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by like a whirlwind. The next morning, the old horse was found without his saddle and with the bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. Ichabod did not make his appearance at breakfast. Dinner hour came, but no Ichabod. The boys assembled at the schoolhouse and strolled idly about the banks of the brook, but no schoolmaster. Hans Van Ripper now began to feel some uneasiness about the fate of poor Ichabod and his saddle. An inquiry was set on foot, and after diligent investigation, they came upon his traces. In one part of the road leading to the church was found the saddle trampled in the dirt. The tracks of horses' hoofs deeply dented in the road and evidently at furious speed were traced to the bridge, beyond which, on the bank of the broad part of the brook, where the water ran deep and black, was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close beside it, a shattered pumpkin. The mysterious event caused much speculation at the church on the following Sunday. Knots of gazers and gossips were collected in the churchyard, at the bridge, and at the spot where the hat and pumpkin had been found. The stories of Bones and the whole budget of others were called to mind, and when they had diligently considered them all and compared them with the symptoms of the present case, they shook their heads and came to the conclusion that Ichabod had been carried off by the galloping Hessian. As he was a bachelor and in nobody's debt, nobody troubled his head any more about him. The school was removed to a different quarter of the hollow, and another pedagogue reigned in his stead. It is true, an old farmer who had been down to New York on visits several years after, and from whom this account of the ghostly adventure was received, brought home the intelligence that Ichabod Crane was still alive, that he had left the neighborhood partly out of fear of the goblin and Hans Van Ripper, and partly in mortification at having been suddenly dismissed by the heiress, that he had changed his quarters to a distant part of the country, had kept school and studied law at the same time, had been admitted to the bar, turned politician, electioneered, written for the newspapers, and finally had been made a justice for the 10-pound court. Brom Bones, too, who shortly after his rival's disappearance conducted the blooming Katrina in triumph to the altar, was observed to look exceedingly knowing whenever the story of Ichabod was related, and always burst into a hearty laugh at the mention of the pumpkin, which led some to suspect that he knew more about the matter than he chose to tell. The old country wives, however, who are the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means, and it is a favorite story often told about the neighborhood round the winter evening fire. The bridge became more than ever an object of superstitious awe, and that may be the reason why the road has been altered of late years, so as to approach the church by the border of the mill pond. The schoolhouse, being deserted, soon fell to decay, and was reported to be haunted by the ghost of the unfortunate pedagogue, and the ploughboy, loitering homeward of a still summer evening, has often fancied his voice at a distance, chanting a melancholy psalm tune among the tranquil solitudes of Sleepy Hollow. Thank you for joining me for more true, strange stories of the unexplained. Remember that you can feel afraid and not be in danger. You're safe here with me. Probably. Please follow the podcast, leave a rating on Spotify or Apple, or tell your friends and foes about the show. It would mean the world to me. The underworld, obviously. I mean, come on, was that not clear? Madame Strangeways is produced and narrated by me, Madame Strangeways. Theme music is by Marina Ryan at marinamakes.co. Cover art is by Andrea Giselle Roldan at Cult of Teddy on Instagram. You can submit your own true strange story at madamestrangeways.com or email it to madamestrangeways@gmail.com. See you soon, she said ominously. On Madame Strangeways. Here. On Madame Strangeways.